Most of you are likely familiar with Rob Cosman's method for cutting dovetails. And if you're not, I'll just drop a link to one of his example videos in the description. In his method, what he does is one of two things. He uses a skew block plane to cut a fine rabbet, just a shallow rabbet on the one side, on the inside. And then the other method is he lays down thick layers of an automotive painter's tape. It looks similar to blue tape, but it's just thicker. I think it's yellow. And then he uses a marking gauge to reestablish the gauge line and cut through that tape, and it provides another reference edge just like the rabbet does. I don't have a skew rabbet plane, and I don't care for the waste of using that much tape. So what I've done is I've made a 3D printed jig that can provide a reference that you can line up to that gauge line. And so what I've included on this as well is a little boss on the inside edges of this so that the clamp sits exactly 25 thousandths of an inch, in my instance here, 25 thousandths of an inch further from the edge of the board. And so what that lets you do is accomplish the same thing his shim method does. So when you line this up at the tailboard, we can slide it one way until it butts into the clamp here, mark out the one side of the pins, shell it the other way, and mark out the other side. And that'll account for the saw curve. Using Rob's method, what I'll do is I'll bring my plane in and then get this lined up so that it's just flush with the plane. Perfect. So now I'll bring in the 3D printed jig. Slide that in place. So to mark these out, I'll use this, what I made from a piece of pallet strap, which happened to be the same thickness as my saw plate. And I filed into it these really not aggressive rip teeth. So what we'll do is make sure that it's butted all the way to one side. Apply some, make sure that's nice and square. Apply some downforce. Put our crude saw in for marking. And on the same side for each one, I want the pin to be a little bit bigger to accommodate for that saw curve. Now I'll butt it the opposite direction, keeping it nice and square. We'll mark the other side. And so that leaves us with an actual saw curve marking that we can darken with a pencil and then lay out and make our cuts. So the only printed parts that I've got here are these small plastic bits. I will include a file to be able to print this rod. I'm just using a 1/2x1/2 aluminum rod, but it could be changed. I'll include the step files for this, so if you wanted to adjust it to use a different sized beam for marking that out, that'd be fine as well. These nuts and bolts are M5 in this version. If anyone has a problem sourcing M5, just drop a comment and I can upload a version that uses, I think, 1024 would be the closest equivalent imperial size. I can do that. The setup is a little bit tricky. So that's the only downside I see. You got to be careful setting it up to get it to the gauge line accurately, and you got to be careful that it doesn't slip when you're actually using it. So less wasteful method perhaps than the tape, and probably equivalent time to set it up. Maybe a little less than, when Rob Cosman's doing it. He lays down, I think, 5 layers of tape before making his cuts, so and has to get those lined up by eye just perfectly, just like getting this lined up. And so probably very similar time-wise.